Rick Harrison is the owner of the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas. He has been a businessman and a symbol of American culture on TV for over a decade. However, a recent serious event has completely changed his life. He went from being a familiar face on TV to being suspected of being involved in a shocking armed robbery that shocked the United States. Everything happened too quickly, too dangerously, and too strangely for it to have been an accident. Unknown armed individuals stormed into Rick's in Las Vegas's famous pawn shop. All notions of safety, trust, and control fell apart. Rick not only narrowly avoided death, but he also lost the image he had worked so hard to build up over the years. But the real shock came when investigators found a number of suspicious details. Rick, who had been thought to be the victim, became the subject of an investigation. Questions started to come in about who was really behind the robbery and whether Rick himself had anything to do with setting up this story. Find out more in today's video, The Price of Fame. Before Rick Harrison became the center of a complicated criminal case, he was one of the biggest stars of American reality TV. He is a silver-haired man with a half-smile and a sharp, authoritative voice who is best known for his role on the hit show Pawn Stars, which premiered on the History Channel in 2009 and quickly became a TV phenomenon with over 7 million viewers per episode at its peak, which is an unimaginable number for a show about a pawn shop. Rick was the heart and soul of the show, and his knowledge of there were history buffs, slick talkers, and sincere people all over the world watching his show. It not only made people interested in appraisal culture and antiques, but it also made the gold and silver pawn shop a must-see for tourists in Las Vegas. Before the robbery, the shop had about 4,000 visitors a day, according to Visit Las Vegas 2022 data. Rick, his son Corey, and their friend Chumley weren't just running a business. They had built a global brand where the real value wasn't in the items themselves, but in the history and stories behind them. But the price of fame is always high. Running a business that sold high-value items like old guns, vintage Rolex watches, and coins from the Civil War while also being on national TV created a dangerous paradox. The more well-known the business became, the more people wanted to attack it. Within a few years of the show's premiere, Rick and his team were faced with a number of troubling situations, being followed and intruded upon, getting weird fan mail and anonymous threats, and having people come into the shop not to buy anything but out of curiosity or with bad intentions were the first signs that fame didn't just shine a light on success, but also on risks. Fame also made things more difficult inside the business. In an interview in 2021, Rick said, "You can't run a business with traditional commercial principles while simultaneously managing a reality TV show without some clashes." Due to his busy filming schedule, the need to keep up his public image, and the audience's expectations, he often had to make tough choices, like choosing between making money and being true to himself. In this setting, the line between reality and a scripted story blurred, and it became harder to tell the difference between business goals and performance. It was during this peak period that Rick stepped into dangerous territory, where every action, word, and possession of his became a target. As famous people have said, when you become a symbol, you become a target. The gold and silver pawn shop was no longer just a business. It was an open treasure trove full of opportunities for the brave and the careless. When the robbery happened, people didn't just see it as a crime against a business, they saw it as the natural result of Rick's success as a businessman on TV. The incident raised troubling questions. Was Rick's fame on TV the cause of the crime, putting him in danger? Did the fame blind him to the risks, making him underestimate the danger posed by what seemed to be loyal fans? It was at this point where fame and vulnerability met that the seeds of Rick Harrison's tragedy began to grow, setting off a chain of events that is still being talked about today. From pressure to peril at the height of Pawn Stars' success, few knew that behind the image of a calm and sharp Rick Harrison on camera was a people in the business often say that Rick's calm exterior was a result of discipline, faith in the values he pursued, and a fair amount of performance skill. Fame brought not only money, but also an invisible weight, endless public expectations, the demands of TV contracts, and most importantly, the burden of running a business that was getting more complicated and risky. Around 2019, Rick started expanding his business beyond the traditional pawn industry he had invested in. He got involved in cryptocurrency, NFT art, and even bought a few antique appraisal stores across the western United States. In a short interview in 2021, he said, "I can't let myself stop. I'm afraid standing still is falling behind." But his team had to deal with problems they weren't fully ready for, like internal information leaks, operational mistakes, and most importantly, managing high-value inventory. This information came from a former employee who spoke to Las Vegas Weekly in early 2021. 2023 showed that the number of items worth $10, zero or more brought into the gold and silver pawn shop rose by over 38% in the second quarter of 2022 compared to the same time the previous year. This big jump made security insurance and inventory management much more difficult, so more security staff were hired and the camera system was improved. However, according to several insiders, Rick insisted on keeping the shop's open and friendly atmosphere. That, while well-meaning, wasn't practical because the risks were rising. Rick wasn't just dealing with physical dangers, he was also under financial pressures. His investments in the NFT sector didn't give him the returns he was hoping for, and the 2022 financial report for one of his subsidiary companies showed losses totaling $7 million in less than 8 months, which meant he had to juggle money from many places, including pawned goods. In a short time, many rare and valuable items that had been seen on TV were secretly reevaluated or moved within the company, a practice that would later become a central part of the investigation into the robbery. Rick's mental health was also getting worse. A former coworker said he often worked until 2:00 or 3:00 a.m. Around this time, he stopped eating right and started getting angry over small things. He also started getting anonymous threatening messages, which he thought were harmless pranks at first. But when some employees found that the shop's cameras had been hacked, Rick had to hire cybersecurity experts to do a full system audit. What's interesting is that Rick stays true to his core principle that customers should feel like they're walking into a museum, not a military bunker. This commitment or stubbornness, depending on regardless of how you look at it, Rick left the pawn shop open to attack because he wanted to keep the Pawn Stars experience going. He did this by opening up security holes that criminals would later take full advantage of. In the days before the robbery, Rick was under a lot of stress because he had to balance the needs of viewers, the need to make money, and the fact that things were getting out of hand. For a businessman who had built his brand from scratch, admitting that things were going badly was even though it seemed impossible. Rick Harrison may not have seen the danger coming because he refused to admit his weaknesses. All it took was one spark to start a tragedy, and that spark came on a normal morning at the gold and silver pawn shop, where the terrifying robbery started like any other. It was a weekday morning, and the Las Vegas sun was shining on the familiar neon sign above the front door. Rick Harrison was sitting in his chair. Back in the office, paperwork was being prepared for a new shipment of antiques from Europe, and workers were busy putting new items in glass cases. Outside, a few early tourists were already waiting in queue to see Rick, Corey, or Chumley. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until 9:58 a.m., when it all fell apart in less than 45 seconds. 4 men wearing long coats, hooded masks, and carrying big bags walked into the store. The security guard on duty nodded at them as usual, not noticing anything out of the ordinary. But 40 seconds later, screams and the sound of breaking glass came from the east display area. and one of the men pulled out a gun and held the closest customer hostage, while two others rushed to the appraisal counter where the most valuable items were kept. The fourth man quickly made his way to the office. Rick acted right away by following the training he had learned. He pressed the panic button under his desk to temporarily lock the office door and got the gun he always kept in a drawer. But within 15 seconds, the door was kicked open with great force, and a man in a mask pointed his gun directly at Rick and yelled, "Drop the gun, open the safe, no tricks." All of Rick's theory, security drills, and hundreds of hours of situational training became real. Rick dropped his gun, raised his hands, and started negotiating, even though he knew he was no longer in charge. At the same time, the silent alarm had already called the police, and within 3 minutes, the first patrol car was parked 200 meters from the shop. Officers quickly set up barricades, locked down the whole block, and called in the hostage negotiation team, but the situation inside was complete chaos. Later, witnesses said that the armed robbers moved with precision, knowing exactly where hallways and displays were. Suspicions of insider information were raised when Rick was led to the store's main area with his hands tied and made to sit in front of a crowd of scared customers and employees. One of the thieves, who seemed to be in charge, demanded that Rick open the secure vault in the back, which held items worth about $2,000,004.25 million. Rick tried to stay calm like he had done hundreds of tense negotiations before. By the time the vault requires Tuerson fingerprint verification, the other person isn't here. This wasn't a lie, at least not according to the new security protocols. But his response made the thieves even more angry. About 30 minutes into the incident, one of the thieves dragged Rick to the shop's front door and demanded that the police leave and give them an SUV. The hostage negotiation team started talking to the robbers to try to keep them talking and stop the violence from getting worse. Rick Harrison, who was held hostage by the robbers and became a central figure in their demands, quickly realized that everyone was watching him on social media and local TV stations. He had become a bargaining chip in a life-or-death negotiation. The situation reached critical danger levels during the second hour of the standoff. When one of the robbers saw that the police had completely surrounded the area, he became more angry and pointed his gun directly at Rick's head while yelling, "If we don't get the car, he dies first." This was considered a highest alert hostage crisis because one wrong move could result in a tragedy that would be shown live on TV. The police had to use a distraction strategy by sending in someone dressed as a family member to negotiate while they quietly prepared an assault from the roof afterward. 3 agonizing hours later, the rescue operation was carried out. A SWAT team broke into the building from the back roof and used flashbang grenades, smoke, and noise to confuse the robbers. During the chaos that followed, 1 robber was shot, 2 were subdued, and the last robber, who was holding Rick at gunpoint, was briefly distracted, which let Rick push his hand away and throw him off balance. The police quickly moved in to subdue him, and Rick was freed, shaking but unharmed. When he was no longer the familiar face seen on TV. He was a real person who had just narrowly escaped death and now had to face the harsh reality that fame couldn't save his life in this case. Employees hugged him tightly, and family members broke down in tears, but safety didn't mean the ordeal was over. It was just the start of another journey, a journey of investigation, accountability, and finding secrets that had never been revealed in Rick Harrison's career. The robbery was over, but its aftermath would last for a long time. As the smoke from the grenades cleared and the sound of police sirens faded into the background, details that came to light after the attack led to the scary idea that Rick might not have been a complete victim and might have played a part in the attack in some way, either directly or indirectly. These suspicions, like the first cracks in a wall, would eventually fall apart. The investigation takes a turn. Many people thought the armed robbery at the famous Las Vegas pawn shop was just a stroke. There were no civilian deaths, and Rick Harrison miraculously escaped, but that was just the beginning. In the days that followed, as investigators began putting together the evidence, the legal battle took an unexpected turn. Rick, who had been thought to be the victim, was suddenly being investigated as a possible key player in the whole scheme. While questioning the 3 suspects who were still alive, the Las Vegas Police Department found shocking details about one of them, Jeremy R., 34 years old, and with a history of the pawn shop's layout, from where the valuable items were kept to where the camera system's blind spots were, and said, "We got the information from someone on the inside, someone with access to everything." At first, the police thought it might have been a former employee or an internal security guard. But after looking through the suspects' phones, they found a series of anonymous messages sent over 3 weeks before the robbery. These encrypted messages were disturbingly specific. "The Rolex cabinet lock will be replaced on Tuesday. To the left of the safe is the Napoleon figurine. Don't touch it. It's on direct camera feed from..." Based on the language, tone, and level of detail, police intelligence analysts couldn't rule out the possibility that the informant worked as a manager or executive at the pawn shop. However, they started to suspect Rick Harrison, who was the only person who had full access to all security systems, including those that were regularly updated. Investigators first thought there was no proof that Rick had sent the messages, but they later found that one of Rick's personal electronics, a phone that was only used for running the shop's operations, had been hacked without permission 2 weeks before the theft. A review of the shop's security server logs showed that the hack was internal, not external, as many had thought at first. Another shocking discovery came when investigators looked at old surveillance footage from 2 days before the theft. Late at night, an unidentified man was seen entering and exiting the storage area behind Rick's office. Only Rick had permission to be in that area, so when asked about it, Rick said he couldn't remember who it was and thought it might have been an electrician fixing something. But the maintenance contractor's records showed that day's work wasn't scheduled. Psychologists also noticed some strange things about Rick's behavior during the robbery compared to other victims. While being held at gunpoint, Rick didn't seem to be panicking like other employees and customers did. In one video clip, Rick could even be seen making eye contact with one of the robbers while being tied up. This caused a lot of debate about whether this was a covert signal or just an unconscious reflex. While the reaction was unclear, investigators couldn't rule out the possibility of deeper involvement at this point. Rick hasn't been charged with any crimes, cooperated fully with the police and went to all of their interviews, but his lawyer, a former federal prosecutor, has put strict rules on him, saying that each interview can only last 30 minutes and that all questions must be sent in 24 hours in advance. This has caused some controversy in the media, who wonder why Rick needs such a well-known criminal defense lawyer if he is innocent. As the investigation went deeper, another fact that caused a stir was that the list of stolen items was not random. One of the items was a 1943 Patek Philippe watch worth over $150,000 for an item that had never been on Pawnstars or in the shop's official inventory. Why was this item in the safe, and why did the thief choose it? These questions led investigators to wonder if Rick might have planned to sell some unregistered items and stage the robbery to make it look like they went missing. However, another theory says that Rick may have been set up by someone in the business who used to work with him and knew the shop well. Rick's former business partner, who now works as an antique appraiser in Los Angeles, has been called in to explain their financial ties and see if they have anything to do with the stolen items. The investigation has reached a sensitive point where any new information could completely change the course of the case. Rick has not spoken to the press since the robbery, but in his one public appearance since then, he said, "I am a victim, I almost died." And but for many, especially Pawn Stars fans, Rick's image isn't the same anymore. The biggest question isn't who planned the robbery, but what is Rick really hiding, and what could have led him to be accused. Rick Harrison's fame used to protect him from any negative rumors, but after the robbery and the strange developments in the investigation, that image started to break as more details came out. Questions began to be raised about Rick's involvement. They wanted to know why the successful businessman and reality TV star would put himself in such a dangerous situation. To understand this, we need to look at a series of problems that had been building up for a long time prior to the incident. These include a severe cash flow crisis in Rick's businesses, internal conflicts, and signs of a larger federal investigation looming over him. Vegas investors saw a drop in revenue of more than 25% between 2021 and 2023 at the Pawn Stars chain of stores. This was partly because fewer people traveled after the COVID-19 pandemic and partly because of the move towards online pawning platforms, where buyers and sellers do business directly through third parties without the need for a physical shopfront. Rick had publicly opposed these Amazon-style pawn shop models and refused to digitize his business system, which was seen as conservative and very risky. In early 2022, Rick put a lot of money into the NFT market and rare digital artifacts, which had a lot of potential but also a lot of volatility. He bought digital works about American history worth over $4 million in the hopes of expanding the Pawn Stars brand into the digital world. However, when the NFT market crashed at the end of 2022, Rick lost a lot of money and couldn't get it back. A financial analyst from Forbes said, "He acted like someone looking for a quick fix, something very dangerous." Along with these financial problems, Rick had problems with shareholders and partners in his businesses. A former investor in one of Rick's pawn shop expansions in California sued him for hiding transactions and changing appraisal documents for valuable artifacts. The lawsuit had not yet been resolved, but it caught the attention of the IRS and federal trade inspectors just before the robbery. According to documents that were leaked, Rick was issued a subpoena by the U.S. Securities and the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) asked for more information about where some high-value items on Pawn Stars came from, which led to the second theory. Rick was trying to get rid of evidence before a formal investigation could start. The fact that several valuable items were stolen and can't be found has led many to believe the robbery was a clever plot to hide evidence that could be linked to money laundering or shady transactions. Rick could then use the loss of the assets to claim insurance losses. According to Art Market Watch, this is a strategy that many businesses in the art and antiques market have used to avoid answering questions about where they came from. Another theory, which gets less attention but is talked about a lot among people who work in the industry, is that Rick may have been threatened by an unknown force in the high-end collectibles market. Over the years, the premium collectibles market has been run by a small group of wealthy elites and international organizations that set prices, have access to exclusive information, and often do not tolerate outsiders, especially someone with as much public influence as Rick. If Rick had held on to sensitive legal items like smuggled artifacts, he could have become a target for elimination. According to this theory, the robbery could have been a warning shot. On the other hand, Rick may have planned the event himself out of fear of getting deeper into this dangerous game. The problem is that there is no solid evidence that Rick planned the robbery, so everything is still just a guess. The police haven't charged him yet, the media is split, and Rick himself hasn't said a word, only through his lawyer, saying that he had nothing to do with any of it. But when you look at the bigger picture, Rick's unstable finances, his legal problems with partners, the disappearance of important items, all of these things make for a very suspicious story. Experts say that even if Rick didn't plan the theft, he's almost certain to be charged with it because of the way the business world works. Rick has a lot of high-value assets and a public image that is linked to media influence. This makes him a perfect target for many conspiracy theories. Some have even called this the O.J. Simpson effect of the pawn industry, where the main figure can't prove they are innocent even if they may not have broken the law. As investigations continue, Rick, who used to be in charge of all negotiations in his pawn shop, is now being closely looked at. Questioned, the question is not whether he is involved, but how involved is he? In a world where the truth isn't always black and white, it's often the gray areas where a person's career and life are decided. 6. Psychological and personal effects after the incident. If the robbery shocked the public with its violence and the legal suspicions surrounding it, for Rick Harrison, what happened inside his mind was the scariest thing. He was once a calm man. Rick was accused of stealing antique guns and convincing customers to give up fake items with just a few words. The incident destroyed the image he had built for himself as the in-charge, the judge, and the person who knew everything. Instead, he became a real victim, not only of the thieves but also of the fame and life he had made for himself. As soon as he was rescued, Rick was taken to a nearby hospital for a physical and mental checkup, even though he wasn't seriously hurt. When Rick was hurt, doctors quickly recognized signs of post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), a condition that is common in people who have been in life-threatening situations. Rick had trouble sleeping and nightmares about having a gun pointed at his head. He also couldn't go into his office, where he worked every day, because he felt so uneasy. According to a family friend, Rick would cry just hearing the doorbell ring, as if his body had imprinted that sound on his mind. Rick had to temporarily stop all business and TV activities when his son Corey Harrison took over running the shop and taking care of things related to making Pawn Stars. It was a hard change for Corey, who and Rick often argued about business strategies, but Corey became Rick's emotional support and helped him remember that he didn't have to do everything himself. Rick, on the other hand, started going to a private center for intensive therapy with psychologists 3 times a week, according to information shared by his lawyer. The goal of these sessions was to help Rick feel safe again, control his panic attacks, and trust his surroundings again. During one session, Rick admitted that he felt betrayed by the life he had built. This is a natural feeling for a man who spent his career telling others everything has a price, now had to pay it. Ask yourself the tough question, what is the cost of fame? Beyond the fear of robbery, what really upset Rick was the feeling of losing control, which he had thought he had for over 30 years on the set of Pawn Stars. Rick was always the one making decisions, evaluating situations, and taking charge. But during the robbery he was put in a completely passive role, unable to coordinate, evaluate, or even protect others. This hit him right in the pride of his personality. People across the country respected Rick for his calmness and leadership. His loss of control got worse when rumors about his involvement in the robbery started to spread widely on social media. Hundreds of posts, videos, and podcasts looked at every detail of his actions and words captured on surveillance footage. From how he spoke to the thieves to his facial expressions and body language. Rick could not simply deny the rumors. He reportedly told a family member, "I've lived by the public and now I'm dying by the public." This revealed a deep wound. The admiration of millions of people had turned into doubt or even hatred. Family played a key role in Rick's recovery journey beyond Corey. Nephews, his ex-wife, and even people who had left the Pawn Stars enterprise visited, told him stories, and supported him. They didn't question the truth or question him about his potential. There was a crisis of trust, and the only thing Rick still had left was a family that wasn't affected by public opinion. But the bigger question is still unanswered. Does Rick want to, or is he even able to go back to work? Due to his current mental state, doctors say it's unlikely that he'll be able to go back to TV in the next 6 to 12 months. Some business partners have suggested giving the Pawn Stars brand entirely to Corey's leadership or finding a new direction. That downplays Rick's role, but the question isn't just about work, it's about purpose. Rick wasn't just the owner of a pawn shop, he was an icon, and when that icon falls, he loses the reason to keep going. This isn't the first time Rick has had to deal with personal loss. The death of his father Richard Boldman Harrison in 2018 broke his heart, but work helped him get over it. This time is different, though, because Rick doesn't have the show, the shop, or the public's full trust. Now that the world is changing faster than ever, Rick Harrison has to start over. He has time and choices. He could disappear completely to find peace in a quieter, more private life, or he could come back with a new image that is more mature, more vulnerable, but also more real. No matter what he decides, Rick Harrison will never be the same man again. He has crossed a line that no one wants to cross. The price of fame is paid in trust, composure, and sometimes even violence. When the robbery was over and the media moved on to other hot topics, Rick Harrison's legacy in business and on TV remained, but it wasn't the same. The gold and silver pawn shop, a symbol of Las Vegas and the heart of the Pawn Stars show, closed temporarily just 3 weeks after the crime, though there was no official announcement of its closure. The sign was covered, customers stopped coming in, and employees were fired. Many people felt like this wasn't just the end of a business, but also the end of an era. The History Channel's Pawn Stars show, which had been a big hit, also went into limbo. Pre-recorded episodes were put on hold indefinitely. The production crew moved on to other projects, and Rick, who had been in every episode since the beginning, was no longer on any production schedules. The network released a short statement expressing its regret. It expressed sympathy for Mr. Rick Harrison's current situation and wished him a speedy recovery, but it didn't say anything about the show's possible return. In reality TV, where every star is a living brand, a scandal, no matter how unresolved, can be enough to freeze everything indefinitely. The incident left an emotional void among viewers who once saw Rick as a model of knowledge, humor, and business acumen. Now that image has been replaced with doubt, ambiguity, and disappointment. Fans even felt betrayed that the Rick they admired could be connected to a case with so many unanswered questions, even though he was never officially charged. The public's opinion, like a courtroom without lawyers, has given its verdict. From a broader point of view, Rick Harrison's story shows an undeniable truth about reality TV. When a business is shown on hundreds of episodes, the line between fame and risk is dangerously thin. Every valuable thing is out in the open for everyone to see, including fans and people with bad intentions. Because of this, the theft doesn't seem like a one-off event, but rather the natural result of living in a fake world that is too open. But every story has an ending, and Rick Harrison's is no different. Even though he is going through a tough time emotionally and professionally right now, some people still think he will come back as someone other than a TV star. Rick Harrison once said, "I don't just appraise antiques, I appraise stories." And maybe the best story of his life is the one he didn't expect, the one in which he himself is appraised, scrutinized, and judged by everyone. The final question that hangs in the air is whether Rick Harrison was a victim or a mastermind, whether he was sucked into the vortex of power and money, or whether he was the one who created it. Some people think that he started the robbery, while others think that he was just a pawn in a bigger game where people behind the scenes wanted to clear the board, erase evidence, and control the story. These theories will continue to grow and change over time, but one thing is for sure: Rick Harrison, who used to be in charge of everything in the world of antiques, is now a player in a game where he doesn't have the lead role. The robbery only lasted a few hours, but the effects it had on Harrison's life could last forever. Rick is now a reality TV star, which has led to suspicion, public pressure, and unanswered questions. Is he a victim caught up in a plot, or is he hiding part of the truth behind the spotlight? The story doesn't end here, and what's happening now could just be the start of a much more complicated series of events. What do you think? Is Rick Harrison truly innocent, or is there something bigger being hidden behind the robbery? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video thought-provoking, please like and share it. Please subscribe to the station so you don't miss any new information about this shocking case. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.